Hello. In the temple of Isis, time ceases to exist. Here, among ancient columns, the fates of entire peoples hang suspended on the edge of silence, and priests lose their minds trying to distinguish a sign from the gods in an ordinary draft of air. You are the last one still waiting for an answer from the marble goddess, whose smile has outlived dynasties, wars, and prayers long forgotten, along with those who uttered them. But before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'm really curious to see who's joined us. Now, settle in and get comfortable. Let's begin. You awaken in the cold shadow of 24 columns, each one older than the last 10 dynasties of your people combined. The air in the temple of Isis is heavy, not with incense or mysticism, but with dust, boredom, and the very real possibility that you are, in fact, still asleep and dreaming of this tedious awakening. The slab you slept on last night is neither bed nor altar, and your back aches with the unique precision only stone can provide. It is almost impressive how uncomfortable you feel. You blink in the semi-darkness, only to realize that it is not dawn or dusk, but that perpetual gray gloom which clings to sacred spaces no matter the hour. It seems the gods, much like temple architects, prefer a certain dimness, possibly to conceal the growing cracks in both stone and faith. The columns themselves loom like ancient sentinels, each one inscribed with stories so old that even the dust seems to recite them with a resigned sigh. You count the columns, not out of curiosity, but because you have nothing better to do. You reach 24. You count again. Still 24. No new column has appeared as a sign, nor has one vanished in a fit of divine whimsy. If you are waiting for a miracle, you have already missed it. Above you, the roof is a masterpiece of engineering and, more importantly, a testament to generations of laborers with nothing but time and the slow threat of heat stroke to motivate them. Small beams of light trickle through holes in the ceiling, marking the hours as slowly as the priest who tallies the donations each month. The flickering shadows play on the walls, turning ordinary reliefs into contorted faces that seem to laugh at your expense. You suspect that, if you wait long enough, the gods might tire of the joke and send you a more straightforward sign, something less ambiguous than a crumbling fresco or a particularly energetic rat. As you sit up, your joints pop in protest, echoing faintly through the chamber. The sound is not particularly impressive, but here, any sound could be a sign. At least, that is what the older priests always said. Now, most of them have faded away, leaving you and the columns and the goddess's unblinking marble gaze. You notice, with a certain sense of irritation, that no one has swept the floor in at least 3 weeks. It is possible that the gods have been waiting for someone to clean up before delivering their next great revelation. You stretch your legs, ignoring the bite of cold through your linen tunic. At this hour, the temple is neither hot nor cold, merely indifferent. The birds outside the thick walls have gone silent, either out of reverence or apathy. There is no wind. There are no voices. Only the slow drip of condensation from the roof, which you are certain is not a sign, but might become one if you are desperate enough. And so you sit among the columns, among the dust, among the weight of 1,000 unfulfilled prophecies. You try to remember who you are, or perhaps more accurately, who you were supposed to become. The answer is not forthcoming. Perhaps it is lost somewhere in the cracks between the flagstones, or perhaps the gods have misplaced your destiny while dealing with more urgent matters, like making sure the Nile floods on time, or keeping the stars from falling out of the sky. Time passes. It always does, even here. You listen for the soft rustle of papyrus scrolls, for the footfalls of fellow supplicants, for the whispered prayers that once filled the temple with something resembling hope. Instead, you hear only your own breath, shallow and a little bit annoyed. You could pray, but you suspect that Isis, queen of the heavens and mother of magic, is as weary of listening as you are of speaking. You stare at her image carved on the far wall. She is both mother and goddess, judge and protector. Her expression is inscrutable, her marble lips pressed into a smile that could mean anything or nothing at all. Did she ever tire of waiting for signs? Did she ever feel the weight of silence pressing down on her? You wonder if anyone ever asked her, or if they simply assumed she always had all the answers. It must be exhausting being worshipped for eternity and never getting a day off. You try to find meaning in the shadows, in the patterns of dust, in the slow dance of light across ancient stone. You search for omens in the smallest things. A crack in the altar, a chip in a column, the way the silence seems to thicken just before the dawn. You want to believe that your waiting matters, that you are not simply a speck of boredom floating through history. But the longer you sit, the more you realize that the gods, if they are watching, have a peculiar sense of humor. And so you wait, as those before you waited, and those after you will undoubtedly wait as well. You wait for a sign from the gods, knowing that the only certainty is the passing of time and the growing ache in your lower back. The fate of your people hangs in the balance, or so they tell you. But for now, all you can do is sit among the columns, watching the dust settle, and hope that the gods are paying more attention than you are. You sit longer than anyone should sit, surrounded by the oppressive dignity of sandstone, and eventually you notice something strange. The temple is not as silent as you once believed. It breathes with a slow, measured rhythm. The columns are not just columns, they are the ancient ribs of something much older than your city or even your river. You listen, at first out of boredom, and then out of a creeping curiosity that feels suspiciously like hope, and you begin to hear the temple whisper. At first, it is only a faint suggestion, a gentle hiss like sand slipping through tired fingers. But gradually, the whisper grows, weaving in and out of your thoughts, as if the very stones around you have decided to share secrets best left forgotten. The language is not yours, not even close. It might be the tongue of a priest king from 1,000 years ago, or just the sigh of wind between blocks of stone. But whatever it is insistent. You close your eyes and listen harder, because that is what one does when nothing else is left. You try to tune your ear to the rhythms of a world where gods once walked among mortals, wearing crowns of gold and sandals of battered leather. You hear tales of the river, of the years when it ran high and drowned whole villages in its generosity. You hear of the hungry seasons, of famines and festivals, and the endless catalog of sacrifices made in hope of better weather or kinder rulers. The temple is a gossip. It remembers every story, every complaint, every failed prophecy. It tells you of a boy who once snuck in at midnight to steal a sacred offering. He tripped over his own ambition and spent the night locked in with the statues, swearing never again to trust a god who smiled with all her teeth. The temple remembers the old women who swept its floors, who whispered their own hopes into the cracks, and prayed for the patients to outlive their grandchildren. It remembers the priests, the acolytes, the guards who all swore allegiance, not to Isis herself, but to the system of rituals that paid their wages. You realize, to your dismay, that every stone you see is stained with boredom and regret. The whispers are not so much sacred as they are tired. They tell you, with the dry humor of ancient walls, that waiting for a sign from the gods is the oldest occupation in the world. It is, perhaps, the only truly eternal tradition. You feel a kinship with the masons who must have set down their tools centuries ago and muttered, "Maybe tomorrow the gods will tell us what this column is really for." The sand on the floor is another witness to the passing centuries. It shifts and sighs with the faintest breath of air, swirling into patterns that mean everything and nothing. You try to read them, hoping for a message, but the sand only mocks you by rearranging itself each time you blink. Somewhere deep in your memory, you recall that the priests once studied omens in the footprints of birds left in the temple sand. It occurs to you that if a pigeon were to wander in now, you might crown it as the next oracle. A sudden breeze sweeps in through a high window, stirring the sand and making the shadows dance. For a heartbeat, the whispering grows louder, almost frantic, as if the temple itself is desperate to be heard before silence settles again. The sound is like a riddle with no answer, a question posed to a god who is too busy or too bored to respond. You think of all the times your people have gathered outside these walls, hoping for a word from above. You remember the nervous faces, the sick children, the elders who stare at you as if you hold the secrets of life and death in your trembling hands. The pressure is absurd, almost comical, and you wonder if any of them realize how much you are simply guessing, improvising ancient wisdom with the confidence of a stage performer who has forgotten his lines. A grain of sand lodges itself in your sandal, and you wiggle your foot, annoyed. The temple whispers, "Get used to it." You sigh and shift your position on the cold stone. The column nearest to you creaks ominously, which might be an architectural warning or just another joke at your expense. You wonder if, thousands of years from now, some other unlucky soul will sit where you are, listening for signs and finding only the same stubborn silence. Still, you wait. You listen. The temple tells you another story, this one about a high priest who received his long awaited sign, a falling tile that struck him on the head. The people took it as an omen to build the roof higher, and so they did, one tedious layer at a time. You smile despite yourself. The gods have never lacked for irony. Somewhere far away beyond the reach of the temple's slow breath, you imagine your people going about their day. They plow, they gossip, they grumble about taxes and the price of fish. None of them envy you. They would rather dig in the heat than sit in the shadow of the gods and wait for a whisper. You cannot blame them. The whisper fades. The sand settles. The stones grow quiet again, leaving you alone with your doubts and the hollow certainty that history will remember your waiting as either a great act of faith or a monumental waste of time. You stare at the nearest column and imagine it staring back. Perhaps you have already become another story, one more whisper in the endless litany of the temple. You wait, you listen, and the temple, patient as always, prepares its next story for you, whether you want it or not. You are not sure how long you have been staring at the marble visage of Isis, the lady of 10,000 names. It could be minutes, hours, or the entire reign of an exceptionally mediocre pharaoh. Her face, carved with obsessive care centuries ago, holds an expression that never quite matches any mood you have ever seen among mortals. The lips are curved in a smile that is almost kind, but not quite. There is a sliver of mischief, or perhaps it is just the faintest shadow of disappointment. Either way, you have never seen a statue look so smug. The sculptor, whoever he was, must have been either brilliantly irreverent or terribly bored. You can almost hear him chiseling away, muttering to himself about the folly of capturing divine beauty in stone. Perhaps he laughed too when he finished those lips, knowing that priests and supplicants for centuries would come before this goddess and wonder what, exactly, she was smiling about. You try to interpret the smile because you are supposed to. You are supposed to search for meaning in every detail of her face, in every crease of her marble dress, in every curl of her wig. The priests before you invented entire schools of thought devoted to the goddess's expression. Some claimed it was the smile of patience, of a mother waiting for her children to learn, slowly, painfully, the lessons she already knows. Others said it was a smirk, a sign that Isis found the prayers of mortals amusing, like a child watching ants parade in single file. But now, as you sit here under her unblinking gaze, you suspect it is the smile of someone who has already read the end of the story and is pretending not to spoil it for everyone else. You rise from your slab, dust settling around your feet, and move closer to the statue. Her eyes, once inlaid with precious stones, are empty sockets now, robbed in one of the many, many periods of crisis and restoration that define your country's history. You stare into those hollow eyes and feel something like kinship. Both of you have been waiting a long time. The marble is cool to the touch. You reach out, not quite touching, because even the most lapsed priest knows better than to tempt fate so early in the morning. The rumors say the goddess can turn her smile into a frown, but only for the exceptionally foolish. You are not quite ready to find out if that is true. You speak to her in a low, conspiratorial whisper. Well, Isis, are you planning to give me a sign today? Or is this just another exercise in divine patience? Your words disappear into the quiet, muffled by the heavy air. The goddess remains silent. Her smile does not change. You think about all the times you have come to this temple as a child, clutching your mother's hand and staring up at this same face. Back then, it seemed impossibly large, impossibly wise, impossibly powerful. Now, with the years pressing down on you and the future of your people hanging in the balance, she seems only impossibly indifferent. Around the base of the statue, offerings have been left: coins, garlands, a cracked amulet, even a small loaf of bread that looks uncomfortably like it has been nibbled by rats. You wonder if the goddess appreciates the gesture, or if she keeps a running tally of how many gifts have gone uneaten, how many prayers unanswered. You study her hands, resting in her lap, holding the ankh and the scepter with the ease of someone who does not really need to use them. Power, it seems, is most secure in the hands of those who have already decided not to wield it. Or perhaps she simply knows that mortals will wear themselves out running in circles, asking the same questions and hoping for new answers. It strikes you in this moment that the greatest joke of all might be this: the gods are as bored as the people who wait for them. You lean in closer, as if to share a secret, and confess, if you really want to change the fate of my people, a little clarity would go a long way. Or is the point that we must invent meaning for ourselves? The smile persists, unchanged, undisturbed by your plea. You imagine Isis winking at you just once, breaking the endless cycle of hope and ambiguity. But she does not, and you are left with only your own reflection, faint and flickering in the polished stone. You step back and look around the temple, suddenly aware of how many generations have stood in this very spot, each one desperate for a sign. You realize that your ancestors, for all their wisdom and ritual, probably spent just as much time staring at this enigmatic smile, asking the same impossible questions. You are part of a tradition, you suppose, one that stretches back as far as the stone itself, waiting for gods to speak, for fate to reveal itself, for the world to make just a little more sense. If there is meaning in this, it is buried deep within the marble, deeper than any chisel could reach. Still, you wait. The goddess smiles, and the day drags on, slow and deliberate, like the unfolding of a story you already know by heart, but are forced to hear again, just in case something has changed. You stay where you are, perched awkwardly on a stone bench that has grown familiar in the way only deeply uncomfortable things can. There is an oil lamp burning at your side, set on a squat little stand that looks like it was carved out of the leftover ambitions of a dozen failed architects. The lamp's flame flickers and dances, casting tall, contorted shadows across the walls. It is difficult to ignore how these shadows creep and linger, bending around every crack and carving, as if the past itself is reaching out for your attention. In the shifting glow, the shapes lengthen and blur. You have read that the ancient priests would have seen omens in these shadows, faces of gods, or signs of disaster, or more rarely, the promise of a good harvest. Today, they mostly look like long limbed insects or awkwardly hunched old men. There is an undeniable humor in the thought that your fate and the fate of your people could be determined by the way a lamp flame happens to move on a sleepless morning. You wonder what the priests of old would say if they could see you now. Would they nod with the grave solemnity of those who have watched too many seasons pass, or would they chuckle quietly at your discomfort? After all, you have inherited their robes and titles, but not necessarily their certainty. The line between priest and fraud is, you suspect, a question of luck and timing. You shift, watching as the flame's shadow splits and reforms. For a moment, it looks like a hand reaching out from the wall, and you laugh to yourself. This is how superstitions are born. One lonely soul with too much time and too little light. Still, you cannot help but shiver, because in the ancient world, laughter and fear are separated by only the thinnest veil. In the half light, you sense another presence, a heaviness in the air, a prickle at the base of your neck. You are not alone, not really. This temple is thick with the ghosts of old priests, those who spent their lives here in service, their hopes and disappointments woven into the very dust. You can almost see them now, some standing tall, others bent beneath the weight of ritual and regret. They are everywhere and nowhere, silent but utterly present. The dead priests do not look especially wise or frightening. In your mind's eye, they are mostly tired. Their eyes are sunken, their mouths downturned in a mixture of resignation and mild irritation. It occurs to you that eternity in the temple may not be the afterlife they had hoped for. They seem restless, as if still waiting for something, a sign, an answer, or perhaps just for someone to finish a ritual that was never quite perfected. You want to ask them for advice, but their expressions suggest that advice, like lamp oil, is always in short supply. Instead, you find yourself apologizing to the empty room, feeling vaguely responsible for all the centuries of confusion. I am doing my best, you whisper, though I am sure it is not enough. The shadows do not answer, but the lamp flickers violently, as if in agreement or mockery. You remember stories you heard as a child about how the oldest priests would sometimes lock themselves in the temple for days, fasting and praying until the gods finally relented and sent a sign. Some emerged triumphant, claiming visions and blessings. Others came out pale, gaunt, and tight lipped, refusing to speak of what they had seen. You wonder if those who stayed silent simply saw nothing, just shadows and the slow dance of flame, the endless waiting that wears a person down until they cannot tell the difference between a miracle and a mirage. The silence thickens. You watch the lamp, feeling the hours stretch thin and fragile. The temple is not a place for dramatic revelations, at least not today. It is a place where time gathers in the corners and sits quietly, waiting for someone to notice. You think of all the priests whose names are carved into the pillars, all those whose names have long since crumbled into dust. Did they ever truly believe that their vigilance would change the world? Or did they, too, suspect that waiting was simply a way to feel important in the face of uncertainty? A sudden gust finds its way through a crack in the stone, causing the flame to gutter and the shadows to dance in wild confusion. For an instant, you imagine the dead priests shaking their heads at you, as if to say, it was never about the sign. It was always about the waiting. You almost laugh, but you do not want to disturb the silence any further. You lean back, feeling strangely comforted by the presence of these imagined ghosts. You may not have answers, but you have company, however fleeting, however silent. You wonder if, centuries from now, someone will sit where you sit and feel your shadow stretching across the wall, another anonymous guardian in an endless line of watchers. You think that is probably the only immortality anyone can reasonably hope for. The lamp continues to burn, steady and uncertain, and you find yourself whispering to the dead, "If you see the gods before I do, tell them I am waiting." The flame sputters once more, and the shadows gather close, nodding their silent approval. You wait, as they waited before you, and as others will wait after you, hoping, somewhere in the dance of flame and shadow, to find a sign that the gods remember you at all. By now, you have exhausted every position a human body can occupy on hard stone. Knees folded, legs sprawled, spine bent in new and interesting ways. None of it makes the waiting easier. You try counting cracks in the floor, but lose track somewhere around 79. Instead, you focus on the walls, those solemn slabs smothered with carvings and hieroglyphs that seem to judge you for your impatience. The inscriptions are everywhere. They twist and snake up columns, sprawl across lintels, and crowd into every possible space, as though the old priests feared silence even more than you do. Every surface is thick with words, stories, and commands, so many, in fact, that you wonder how anyone could ever have made sense of them. Maybe that was the point. The more words you carve, the less likely anyone will notice that none of them say anything useful. You squint at a line of glyphs above your head, trying to decipher their meaning with the help of a few half-remembered lessons and a great deal of wishful thinking. You think you recognize a symbol for water, though it might be serpent or possibly taxes. This is the trouble with holy languages. They are always more ambiguous than their keepers would admit. As you scan the endless parade of birds, eyes, and oddly optimistic little men carrying baskets, you begin to notice something else. Some of the carvings are older than others. The deeper you look, the further back you travel, not just through the history of your people, but through the history of forgetting. There are places where the inscriptions have been worn nearly flat, smoothed by centuries of curious fingers and reverent hands. There are places where the newer glyphs have been carelessly scratched over older ones, as though the present was in a great hurry to obliterate the past. You wonder who wrote these words. Were they hopeful, hammering their prayers into stone in the belief that eternity might actually be paying attention? Or were they merely filling up space, trying to keep busy while waiting for a sign that never came? You imagine the chisel slipping in tired hands, the carver sighing and thinking about dinner, the overseer scolding him for a crooked ibis. It is all very noble and very tedious, which you realize sums up most of your religion. You trace a line of text with your finger, feeling the grooves where the stone gives way. Your ancestors wrote stories about creation, destruction, floods, and kings who thought themselves immortal until their names were spelled wrong. You pause at a panel depicting Isis herself. She is always here, always watching, surrounded by symbols that promise clarity and deliver riddles. In one scene, she raises her hands to the sky. In another, she sits serenely, her gaze just missing yours by a fraction of a degree. Every image suggests movement, change, intervention, yet the stone is utterly, stubbornly still. You think about the young apprentices who must have stood where you are now, learning how to copy the old forms, how to leave their mark without changing anything that mattered. It is easy to see why some of them would have grown restless, maybe even rebellious. Somewhere in the margin, you find a small, awkward carving of a fish. It is not part of any myth, you know. Perhaps it was a joke or the result of a bored child's mischief. Perhaps it was a sign, but if so, its meaning is lost to everyone but the fish. You sit back, letting your eyes blur, letting the carvings turn to meaningless patterns. You remember stories of priests who went mad, trying to decipher the will of the gods from the endless confusion of symbols. You understand now how it happens. Every answer creates another question. Every certainty melts away in the heat and the dust. Still, you hope. You cannot help yourself. You read and reread the same lines, trying to squeeze a drop of meaning from the ancient stone. You pray, not with words, but with the restless movement of your eyes and hands. The temple is full of unanswered prayers, each one carved as if it might outlast the stones themselves. The silence presses in. You hear the faint sound of your own breathing, and, somewhere far off, the dull scuffle of a lizard's feet on cold stone. You imagine the walls whispering to one another, sharing all the secrets that mortals will never understand. You feel very small and very temporary. You think, not for the first time, that the gods must have enjoyed confusing their worshippers. Why else fill a temple with so many riddles and so few solutions? Why else carve entire histories into stone only to let them fade year after year into dust? Perhaps confusion is a kind of sign, a reminder that certainty is always an illusion and that faith is not about answers, but about the courage to keep asking. You sigh and let your hand fall away from the wall. You are tired, but not defeated. You are bored, but still waiting. You are surrounded by inscriptions, some meaningful, some senseless, and for the moment, that will have to be enough. Somewhere outside, a bird cries. In here, the only thing that moves is time. You are not sure at what hour the ghost arrives. In the temple, time folds in on itself like damp linen. Shadows move where they wish, and the lamplight has never been trustworthy. One moment, you are alone, staring at a series of chipped hieroglyphs that might be a prayer or might be a badly misspelled recipe. The next, you notice a flicker, a presence coalescing in the far corner, drawn out of the gloom as if the darkness itself is surrendering something it can no longer keep to itself. He wears the ceremonial headdress of a priest, one of those ridiculous things with stiff feathers and an improbable amount of faded blue paint. The effect is halfway between dignity and mockery, which you realize is probably true of most priestly attire. He stands with the stoop of a man who has carried too many secrets for far too long. You try not to stare, but he seems to expect it. If anything, he looks a little disappointed not to be recognized. You are not afraid. Not really. The ghost seems too tired to be menacing. He surveys you with a look that blends boredom, exasperation, and just a pinch of sympathy. When he speaks, it is not with the thunder of the underworld, but with the flat, unimpressed tone of someone who has spent eternity being underwhelmed. So, he says, as if you have interrupted him in the middle of something extremely dull, you are waiting for a sign. You nod, suddenly feeling like a schoolchild who has forgotten his lesson. He sighs, an impressive feat for someone without lungs. They always wait, he says, glancing around at the silent columns, as if the gods will pop in with an announcement. You know, in my time, we at least had the courtesy to invent our own signs. There is nothing so motivating as an audience that expects a miracle before lunch. You want to ask him 1,000 things about the afterlife, about prophecy, about whether there is a correct way to interpret the goddess's enigmatic smile, but instead, you just blurt, "Did you ever see a sign?" He looks at you for a moment, weighing your question. "Oh, plenty," he says at last. "Most of them were accidents. One time the oil lamp exploded during morning prayers. Another time, a stray dog wandered in and sneezed on the sacred bread. There was the year the roof leaked so badly we had to declare it a message from the gods about humility. It is amazing how quickly people will believe in omens, especially if it means they can postpone making any real decisions. He sits beside you, or rather, he hovers just above the stone, making a show of adjusting his spectral robes. "We spent so much time waiting for the divine to intervene," he continues, "when in fact, most of the time, it was just us, mortals, making things up as we went along. You are waiting for a sign, but are you certain you will recognize it when it comes? Or will you, like so many before, twist every coincidence into a message until you finally convince yourself of something comforting or convenient?" You shift uncomfortably. The ghost grins. He enjoys this, you suspect. You want to know what the gods want? They want you to act, to choose. The sign is always the same. You are here, alive, and that is more than most can say. He leans in, the feathers of his headdress brushing your ear like a cold draft. "Of course," he adds, "there are those who claim to have seen true miracles. They are usually the most insufferable sort. You can trust a man who doubts more than a man who is certain. The ones who claim certainty often leave behind the biggest messes. You are almost grateful for his cynicism. It fits the mood of the temple, the sagging weight of all these stone stories and unfinished prayers. The ghost looks around, as if searching for something, and finally fixes you with a look of exasperated affection. Do not waste too much time waiting, he advises. You think you are the first to sit here, wrestling with shadows and silence, but you are only another in a very long, very tedious line. The only difference is that you are still breathing. You look away, embarrassed by how much this matters to you. The ghost seems to sense it. We all want it to matter, he admits, softer now. We all wanted to see a sign that our lives counted for something. Here is what you learn in the end. Even if the gods send a sign, it is always up to mortals to decide what to do with it. The rest is just stories told in the dark. He stands, straightening his robes, and his form begins to thin, dissolving at the edges. Good luck, child, he says, and if you ever invent a miracle, make sure it is at least interesting. The gods have grown very hard to impress. With that, the ghost fades back into the gloom. The lamplight steadies, the silence returns, heavier than before, but less lonely. You are left with only your thoughts and the echo of old laughter threading through the shadows. You sit, you wait, you wonder how many ghosts the temple can hold and how many more it will need before the gods finally answer. As the ghost's presence fades, you become acutely aware of the emptiness around you. It is the kind of emptiness that remembers being full. Once, this hall buzzed with the movement of priests and the chatter of petitioners. Incense hung thick, and somewhere, someone was always singing off key in hopes that the gods were more forgiving of music than mortals are. Now, the only offerings that remain are a few dusty coins, a scattering of cracked amulets, and the odd loaf of bread gone to the mice. Even the mice have grown discerning. They nibble only at the corners, as if in deference to the goddess, or perhaps out of professional disappointment. You recall, with a faint ache, the stories passed down about the grand festivals of old. They always began the same way, an entire town in anticipation, the air heavy with expectation, and the smell of roasting meats. The priests would lead processions of bleeding goats and fattened fowl through the temple gates. The goddess would be praised with baskets of fruit, jars of honey, and more wine than any mortal priest could hope to taste in a lifetime of careful sips. You rise and wander to the small inner sanctuary where sacrifices once piled high. The stone altar is stained a deep brown, a color that has outlived its origin, stubbornly refusing to fade. You run your fingers along the rough edge. There are knife marks, thousands of them, each a memory, or perhaps a silent plea. Some are so shallow they can only have come from a distracted hand, more concerned with appearances than with faith. Others are deep and decisive, carved in moments of genuine fear or hope. Once, the sacrifices were regular and elaborate. Sheep and birds, cakes and perfumes, precious stones offered with trembling hands. You have read the inventory lists. They were meticulous, almost obsessive. every grain of incense, every feather, every drop of oil accounted for, lest the gods feel slighted by some minor omission. There is a story, one you suspect is more warning than history, of a priest who forgot a single fig in a great offering. The very next day, a storm destroyed half the village's crop. Cause and effect were never separated by much in the old days. You try to imagine the chaos of those ancient ceremonies, animals protesting, people jostling for a view, priests sweating under their painted masks, and everyone on edge, waiting for a sign, a breeze, a sudden cry, a flame that burns brighter than before. You wonder if anyone ever noticed that the gods almost never answered directly. Instead, there was always a priest to interpret, to translate silence into something manageable. A twitch in a goat's leg became a sign of good fortune. A slip of a knife meant the river would flood. A gust of wind was proof of the goddess's approval, or her irritation, or sometimes both at once. But those days are gone. The animals are no longer bred for sacrifice, but for labor or food. The only goats you see now are stubborn, ill tempered, and more likely to eat your scrolls than to surrender themselves in the name of piety. The priests who once crowded this hall are mostly dust and memory. The cost of offerings has become an excuse. The goddess surely wants only our purest intentions, people say now, as if intentions can fill an altar or keep a temple from crumbling. You hear the echo of an old priest's voice, reciting a litany of rules and prohibitions. He once told you, as you fidgeted through your lessons, that a temple without sacrifices is like a river without water, grand in theory, useless in practice. You thought him melodramatic at the time, but now you wonder if he was simply honest in a way that only old men and forgotten ghosts can afford to be. You look down at the altar and try to remember the last time it felt alive. You recall a festival not so many years ago when the people still believed their fortunes could be bargained for. They brought what little they had: a jar of olives, a loaf of barley bread, a handful of coins. It was not much, but it filled the room with hope. Now, the silence is so complete that even your breathing seems disrespectful. And yet, in the absence of sacrifices, the rituals persist. You still recite the prayers. You still light the lamps and sweep the floor, occasionally. You still stand before the altar and wait for a sign, as if stubborn repetition might coax the gods into revealing themselves. There is a quiet defiance in it, a refusal to let go of the old ways, even when they have been stripped of their original meaning. You know that somewhere beyond these walls, your people are waiting, not for sacrifices or ceremonies, but for reassurance, for proof that the old gods still care, or at least that someone does. You suspect that is why you keep returning to this altar, why you keep your vigil amid the empty bowls and the stubborn stains. Perhaps the greatest offering you can make now is your own perseverance, your willingness to wait even when there is nothing left to give. You linger in the sanctuary, watching the light shift across the altar, and for a moment, you almost believe you see something move in the shadows, a flicker, a memory, or maybe just your own hope, stubborn as ever. You wait, as those before you waited, surrounded by the echo of vanished sacrifices and the heavy, expectant silence of gods who have learned to say nothing at all. The temple seems to change at night. The last streaks of light filter through the high windows, leaving the air thick with a bluish haze. The gloom gathers, patient and absolute. With the darkness comes a different kind of quiet, one that is heavier, more personal. You find yourself speaking your thoughts out loud, as if confessing secrets to the cold stone. It is in this half light, when the columns stretch into the ceiling like endless tree trunks in a petrified forest, that you hear a faint scrabbling sound. Not the wind, not the shifting of stones, but the careful, deliberate steps of something small and determined. You try to convince yourself it is only your imagination, but the sound grows louder, and then, brazen as a thief, a rat emerges from behind the altar. She is a large rat, with fur the color of old parchment and a torn ear that hints at a life lived without illusions. She stops, sits up on her haunches, and fixes you with the kind of look you might expect from a tax collector or a very experienced grandmother. You stare back, uncertain whether to shoo her away or invite her to share your vigil. She blinks slowly, as if weighing your worth. Still waiting? She asks, in a voice that is scratchy but unmistakably articulate. You blink. The temple is a place of miracles, yes, but this is not one you were prepared for. You clear your throat, trying to regain some measure of dignity. It seems so, you reply, though the gods are taking their time. The rat sniffs at a dried up fig someone left on the altar, wrinkles her nose, and lets out a sigh. They always do, she says, or so I've been told. I have not met a god myself, only priests, but I find that priests are very good at waiting for things that never quite arrive. It is a professional hazard. You wonder briefly if you have fallen asleep. The rat shakes her head as if reading your thoughts. You are not dreaming, though it is possible you have gone a little mad from boredom. It happens to the best of us. You watch her clean her whiskers with meticulous care. She seems in no hurry to leave. What do you know about waiting for signs? You ask, half joking, half desperate. She grins, which on a rat is a surprisingly disconcerting thing. I know that signs are often just shadows, and hunger dressed up as destiny. I know that the greatest miracles are rarely noticed, and I know that priests like to imagine their waiting matters more than it does. The mice and rats of this temple have seen more acts of faith than most gods. Faith is what keeps you still when you could run, quiet when you could shout, hopeful when you should have long ago given up. She noses at the fig again, then glances around the dark sanctuary. Take tonight, for example. The fog has crept in from the river, turning the city into a half remembered dream. The lamps burn lower than usual, and you, instead of sleeping, are here watching the darkness, waiting for a sign. Why? Because you believe, against every reasonable expectation, that something will happen, that someone is listening. I respect that. You do not know how to respond. Instead, you find yourself confessing. I am afraid there will be no sign at all, that I will go back to my people empty handed, that my waiting will be for nothing, and I will have to invent some comfort out of thin air. The rat considers this, tail curled thoughtfully around her paws. You would not be the first. My grandmother lived in this temple before me. She told stories of priests who, when faced with silence, simply decided what the gods must have meant and carried on with admirable confidence. It is a skill worth mastering. The fog thickens outside, rolling in like a tide of sleep. The walls sweat, and the carvings shimmer in the lamplight, becoming briefly unreadable, then clear again. You feel the weight of the night pressing in, the centuries of longing and patience that have built up in these stones. Do you ever wish you could just leave? You ask, surprised by your own voice. The rat laughs, a dry, chittering sound. Every day. But here is where the crumbs are, and the stories, and the warmth of old rituals. Every night I think about escaping, and every morning I am still here, waiting for the next crumb, the next careless prayer, the next foolish human to confide in me. We are all bound to something, even if it is only habit. You nod, feeling the truth of it sink in. I suppose I am bound to this temple, to this waiting. If I left, I would only find myself in another kind of waiting somewhere else. The rat stands, stretching with practiced laziness. You could try looking for smaller signs, a candle that burns a little brighter, a pattern in the dust, a stranger who talks back. The gods are fond of little ironies. So are rats. She pads toward the shadows, tail trailing like a question mark. Good luck, priest. May your sign be clear, or at least interesting. You watch her disappear between two broken tiles, leaving you alone with the fog and the thick silence. You cannot say if you feel comforted or more alone than before, but you know, at least, that you are not the only one waiting in the darkness, hoping for meaning where there may be none. The temple sighs, the fog presses against the windows, and you settle in for the long night, listening, hoping, and finding in the company of a talking rat a sign as strange and fragile as any the gods could send. You are alone again, save for the fog that clings to the outside of the temple and the fading memory of a rat's wisdom. You try to find comfort in the silence, but it presses on you, slow and persistent, like the way dampness seeps into stone. You turn your thoughts inward, circling around the same question that has haunted priests and prophets for as long as there have been temples. Why wait for signs at all? You are supposed to believe, at least that is what everyone expects. Signs are the currency of faith, the reason the desperate and the hopeful flock to stone halls and offer up prayers and sacrifices. Yet, as you stare into the gloom, you wonder if the gods invented signs, or if mortals invented them out of sheer boredom to pass the long hours between real disasters. You think about all the things that have been called signs. A child born under an unusual star, a dog howling at dusk, a loaf of bread that rose just a little too high in the oven. You remember a story your father used to tell, a story about a flock of storks landing on a roof during a drought. The elders declared it a sign of coming rain. 3 days later, a merchant arrived with barrels of water from the delta. The priests called it a miracle. Your father called it good timing and a very smart merchant. You wonder now if the people waiting for you outside the temple want a sign because they truly believe or because they simply need something to explain the next turn of fate. The drought will break or it will not. The river will rise or it will not. A sign is a story that makes waiting bearable, a promise that waiting itself is not a waste, but a part of some grand, hidden plan. You examine your own motives. Are you here for the gods, for your people, or simply for yourself? The answer, you suspect, is complicated. If the gods truly wanted to communicate, would they not make it simpler? A stone tablet left on the altar, perhaps, or a voice booming down from the ceiling. Instead, you are left searching for meaning in the smallest things: a flicker of shadow, a change in the wind, the peculiar pattern left by the fog on the temple floor. It occurs to you that signs, like gods, are most useful when they remain mysterious. Certainty is comforting, but it closes doors. Ambiguity, on the other hand, keeps everyone in suspense. It keeps priests in business, temples filled, and hopes alive. Maybe that is the real miracle: people's capacity to endure uncertainty, to keep waiting, to keep hoping. You pace slowly between the columns, counting your footsteps as if they might add up to an answer. The temple is a perfect place for waiting, for thinking, for losing yourself in the labyrinth of your own doubts. You remember the ghost's words: "You are here, alive, and that is more than most can say." Is that enough? Is the sign you seek nothing more than your own stubborn persistence? You consider going outside, facing your people, telling them that the gods remain silent, that there is no sign, only the world as it always is: beautiful, brutal, and indifferent. You imagine their faces: disappointment, perhaps anger, but above all, relief. No need to change, no need to act. Everything can continue as before. But then you remember the talking rat and her advice to look for smaller signs. You study the dust on the floor, the faint glow of the lamp, the tiny cracks in the stone. You realize that signs do not have to be grand or dramatic. Sometimes a sign is just a reason to keep going, to hold on for one more day. You sit, back pressed against the cold column, and let your mind wander. Maybe waiting is not about finding answers, but about asking better questions. Maybe the gods do not send signs because they want you to figure things out for yourself. Or maybe you think with a smile, the gods just enjoy watching mortals invent meaning where there is none, spinning stories out of the barest threads. You decide, for now, to wait a little longer, not because you expect a miracle, but because you want to see what will happen next. Faith, after all, is not just about believing in the gods. It is about believing that your own waiting, your own searching, matters in ways you may never understand. You close your eyes and listen to the night, to the temple breathing around you, to the distant rustle of rats, and the slow drip of water from the ceiling. In the silence, you find a small, stubborn hope, a hope that is not so much a sign from the gods as it is a sign from yourself. You open your eyes. The night is not over. The waiting, too, is not over. But you feel, if not content, then at least less alone. You are part of an endless chain of seekers, each searching for meaning in the dark, each inventing their own signs to make sense of the silence. And so you continue, waiting, questioning, believing, if only in the value of the waiting itself. There comes a moment, deep in the night, when even your doubts grow weary. You stop pacing, stop listening for whispers, and simply look around, taking in the familiar details that until now seemed beneath notice. It is then that you become aware of the dust, an ancient, stubborn dust, thick on every surface, carpeting the altar, the floor, even the narrow creases of the inscriptions you once found so fascinating. Dust is the true legacy of the gods, you think. Stone may endure, but only dust is eternal. You kneel by the altar and watch as a stray current of air sends a fine veil swirling into a lazy spiral, dancing in the dim lamplight. Each mote catches the glow for an instant, then disappears again into the gray. You remember stories of kings and conquerors, priests and magicians, all believing that what they did here would echo through eternity. Instead, the only thing that echoes is your own breathing, shallow and strangely loud in the stillness. You swipe your finger along the altar's edge, uncovering a narrow strip of smooth stone beneath a millennium of neglect. You wonder how many times this same gesture has been repeated by a nervous apprentice, a meticulous high priest, a bored caretaker. The dust has covered and uncovered the same prayers 1,000 times over, hiding them from memory, then revealing them again to a world that has already forgotten. Somewhere in the dark, a spider's web trembles with the weight of new dust. The web is a marvel, fragile and complicated, beautiful and doomed. You imagine the spider working night after night, rebuilding her web, undeterred by the collapse of the previous one. She is a better priest than you, perhaps, unconcerned with meaning, only with the work itself. You remember when the temple was clean, not because it was sacred, but because there were enough hands to sweep and enough pride to care. Every morning, the young acolytes would chase away the dust, as if it were a personal insult, a failure of devotion. The old priests would smile their thin, knowing smiles and say, "The dust returns to teach humility. We are never more than guests here." It was meant as a comfort. Mostly, it sounded like a warning. Now, dust is everywhere, thick enough that your footprints linger for hours before being erased by the next draft. You begin to see it as a kind of memory, a silent witness to all that has come before and all that will remain after you are gone. Each grain is a fragment of something forgotten, a piece of incense ash from a long ago ceremony, the crumbled edge of a scroll once read with trembling hands, the ground remains of a flower offered in hope or desperation. Even the stones themselves are slowly turning to dust, ground down by time and by centuries of waiting. You stare at your palm, now gray with residue, and feel the weight of ages pressing against your skin. What were those long ago prayers for? Rain, safety, love, forgiveness, did they work? Did anyone notice when the answers never came? The silence of the temple is not just the absence of sound, it is the accumulation of every unfulfilled plea, every hope that died unheard. You stand and walk the perimeter, watching as your passing stirs up little storms, erasing some tracks and leaving others. You think of all the people who have left their mark here, some with hope, some with fear, some simply because it was their turn to wait. Their footprints, too, have faded into the gray, layered beneath your own. And yet, in this dust, you find a strange comfort. Nothing is permanent, not even disappointment. The dust buries everything, but it also preserves. Every now and then, you catch a glint, a bead, a bone, a scrap of gold leaf that reminds you life once thrived in these halls, that faith once mattered enough to move mountains, or at least enough to sweep floors. Even your own waiting will become dust one day. Perhaps it already is. You wonder if, in another 1,000 years, someone else will kneel in this spot, clear a patch of stone with their hand, and feel the same quiet sorrow, the same defiant hope. The gods may be silent, but the dust remembers. It is almost dawn. You hear the faintest bird song drifting in through a crack in the wall. The air is colder now, sharper. You shiver, and for a moment, you imagine the dust around you is alive with all the memories it holds of laughter and tears, prayers and curses, promises made and broken. You are not alone. You are surrounded by the ghostly congregation of everyone who has ever waited here, each of you joined by a thread of dust and longing. You sit, and the dust settles on your shoulders like a blessing, or perhaps a benediction for the unremarkable faithful. You wait for the light, for the next breath, for whatever comes next. The gods are silent, but the dust has a story for anyone who is patient enough to listen. Dawn breaks slowly, as if the sun is reluctant to peer into the temple's long neglected corners. The faint light creeps along the stone floor, illuminating patterns in the dust you never noticed before. Your back aches from the cold, and your mind aches from the weight of endless questions. There is nothing left to do but wait for another sign, or for breakfast, whichever comes first. You are about to resume your study of ancient spider webs when you hear a peculiar noise, a soft, wet, plopping sound, followed by a low, indignant croak. You look toward the dark edge of the sanctuary and, with a slow sense of disbelief that now feels perfectly ordinary, see a fat toad regarding you with unmistakable authority. His skin is the mottled green of old olives, and he sits on a crumbling offering bowl as if it were a throne. The toad blinks, one eye at a time. You look tired, he announces in a voice that is unexpectedly deep, like the rumble of distant thunder. That is the first sign of wisdom, or so I have been told. You are almost not surprised. After rats, what is a talking toad? You incline your head respectfully, recalling old tales that toads were once keepers of secret knowledge, or at the very least, experts at surviving floods and droughts. Are you here to give me a sign? You ask, only half joking. The toad lets out a world weary sigh. Everyone wants signs. No one wants advice, but advice is all that ever really changes anything. He shifts his weight and settles more comfortably onto his bowl. When I was a young tadpole, the priests used to say that every toad was a fallen god, sent to teach mortals humility. I suppose it is true. There is nothing quite as humbling as waiting in the mud for someone else to decide if you matter. You cannot argue with that. Then give me your advice, you say, trying not to sound too eager. The toad considers, as if weighing centuries of amphibian wisdom. At last, he delivers his first piece of advice. Never trust a sign that arrives on time. The gods prefer to be fashionably late. Anyone who claims otherwise is either lying or selling something. He pauses, as if this alone should be worth a carved inscription. You nod solemnly. The toad's second bit of advice comes with a glint of mischief in his bulbous eye. If you find yourself repeating the same prayer for more than a week, change the words. The gods get bored too, you know. They might be more likely to listen if you throw in a joke or two, or at least they will not smite you for lack of imagination. You manage a smile. The advice is not what you expected, but you suppose originality is its own form of wisdom. The toad's final offering is delivered with a slow, theatrical blink. If you ever meet a talking toad, do not take his advice too seriously. Some of us just like the sound of our own voices. He snorts, clearly amused by himself, and then fixes you with a look that is, somehow, both compassionate and slightly pitying. You try to thank him, but he holds up a webbed foot. No need. It is not often someone actually listens. Most of the time, the priests and supplicants are too busy trying to impress the statues. He glances at the impassive form of Isis. I doubt she is impressed. She never is. You glance at the goddess's marble face and wonder if there is a hint of amusement in her smile, or if it is only the morning light playing tricks on your tired mind. The toad lets out another deep croak and begins to climb off his offering bowl, leaving a trail in the dust. If you are waiting for the gods, you will have to learn patience, he says, pausing as if to savor the understatement. But if you are waiting for people to change, you will have to learn comedy. Both will serve you well. He disappears into a crack in the stone, his advice lingering in the air like incense, faint, ambiguous, and oddly reassuring. You find yourself roundly comforted by the idea that even toads have doubts, and that even the most sacred places are not immune to the logic of absurdity. For a long while, you sit in silence, replaying the toad's words in your mind. Perhaps all wisdom sounds absurd at first. Perhaps the gods truly do prefer jokes to prayers. Or perhaps, as the toad implied, wisdom is nothing more than survival, knowing when to wait, when to laugh, and when to leap away before someone mistakes you for an omen. The sun climbs a little higher, casting long, golden fingers across the ancient stone. You are still waiting, but now you do so with a small, secret smile. If nothing else, you have learned that the line between comedy and tragedy is thin indeed, and that sometimes the best signs come with warts and a wicked sense of humor. You close your eyes and let the warmth seep in. The goddess watches, the dust settles, and somewhere in the dark, a toad prepares to tell his story to the next weary pilgrim. There are only so many ways to occupy yourself in a temple built for eternity, but maintained with the energy of a dying star. Eventually, you grow curious about the rumors. Every temple has them. The hidden passage behind a crumbling column, the secret door only revealed in the light of dawn, the chamber where only the worthy or the very bored are allowed to enter. You have heard these stories all your life, and now, after a night of talking rats and philosophical toads, you figure you are as worthy and certainly as bored as anyone who ever lived. You begin to search in earnest. The morning light picks out fresh details, discolored mortar here, an irregular join in the stone there. Your fingers trace grooves in the wall, feeling for the telltale give of a hidden mechanism. You know this place intimately, and not at all. It's a paradox older than any prophecy. The ancient stones are both familiar and secretive, content to let you brush past their mysteries for years, only to trip you at the moment you think you understand them. Finally, after much probing and more than a little cursing, you discover a seam behind a faded tapestry, a motif of the goddess that has always looked a bit too stern. You press, half expecting nothing, and half expecting the wall to collapse and bury you in 3,000 years of indifference. Instead, there is a soft click, and a narrow door swings open with the delicate finality of a long held breath. You stare into the darkness beyond, uncertain whether to be relieved or disappointed. You have always imagined secret rooms as treasure vaults or repositories of forbidden knowledge. You expect piles of scrolls, relics, maybe the bones of a forgotten high priest who once received a sign so powerful that he locked himself away to contemplate it forever. What you find is emptiness. The room is small, barely larger than a closet. The air is thick with the smell of stale dust and old resignation. There are no treasures, no glowing inscriptions, no hidden wisdom. The only things left are the marks of abandonment, a few broken tiles, a spider scurrying for cover, and a single clay bowl overturned and empty. For a moment, you feel cheated. You wonder if you are the first person in centuries to open this door, or simply the latest in a long line of hopeful seekers, each one finding exactly the same nothing. You step inside, half expecting some divine presence to reveal itself now that you have shown such determination. Instead, you hear only the soft echo of your own footsteps, the way sound changes when there is no one left to listen. It occurs to you that perhaps this is the true secret. The gods, like mortals, are experts at hiding emptiness behind elaborate doors. You kneel and examine the bowl because rituals die hard and old habits are difficult to break. It is as empty as the room, as the air, as the space between questions and answers. You turn it over, looking for a message, a carved word, even the scratch of a long forgotten prayer. There is nothing but dust and the stubborn persistence of disappointment. You sit in the emptiness for a while, listening to your own breath and the faint scurry of the spider resettling in her web. It is a pure kind of quiet, untouched by hope or fear. It is, you suspect, the kind of quiet that filled the world before the gods invented words to disturb it. After a time, you realize you feel lighter, as if the weight of all those expectations has slipped away, if only for a moment. You begin to suspect that emptiness itself is a kind of sign, a reminder that most of what we seek is never really there to be found. The secret room is not a revelation, but a mirror. It shows you your own searching, your need to fill silence with stories, your refusal to accept that sometimes the universe simply has nothing to say. Eventually, you return to the main chamber, blinking at the brightness. The temple seems unchanged, but you are not quite the same. The secret door swings shut with a gentle thud, and you are left with the lesson of emptiness. That not every hidden space holds a treasure, and not every question gets an answer. You look again at the statue of Isis, her enigmatic smile more familiar now, more honest. Maybe the gods do not hide things from us because they are cruel, but because there is nothing to hide. Maybe the emptiness is what gives meaning to the stories we tell, the rituals we keep, the waiting we endure. You take a deep breath and let it out slowly, the air cool and clear after the staleness of the secret room. You sweep a hand along the wall, leaving a fresh mark in the dust, a sign, if only to yourself, that you were here, that you searched, that you found something, even if it was nothing at all. You settle down again in the half light, feeling the day creep forward, the emptiness behind you, and the questions ahead. The gods remain silent, and for once, you do not mind. There is room for your own voice in the quiet, and that, you think, is enough. You settle back in your usual spot, the stone now molded to the shape of your worries. You have found hidden doors, met the ghosts of the past and the philosophers of the animal world, and learned that emptiness is sometimes the only thing waiting behind ancient walls. Yet, even with all of this, the most uncomfortable question keeps gnawing at the edge of your thoughts. Why should the fate of your people rest on you, or anyone for that matter? There is no shortage of stories about chosen ones, priests and priestesses who received a sign and became legends. You have recited those names since childhood: the oracle who predicted the flood, the maiden who stilled the locusts, the madman who saw the burning sky. The stories are always simple. They're heroes chosen by the gods in a flash of fire or a whisper in the dark. The fate of the people, the stories insist, can be changed by a single moment, a single vision. You look out towards the first hints of daylight, thinking of your own people beyond the temple walls. They are not waiting for a miracle so much as an excuse not to change, or not to accept that change is already happening, or not to take responsibility for choices that are never as grand as they sound in stories. Every year, they crowd around the temple on festival days, faces raised to the sun and to you, hoping for words that will make sense of the world, or at least make the waiting easier to bear. You remember their faces, the young and the old, the tired and the hopeful, each one certain that the gods have a plan that includes them, if only you are wise or brave or pious enough to see it. They do not want the burden of fate. They want reassurance, direction, a sense that someone else is responsible for whatever happens next. You see now that you are only the latest in a very long line of intermediaries, a bridge between the gods' silence and the people's longing for answers. You think about the high priests of old, the ones whose names survive in carved stone and half remembered songs. Did they ever truly believe they were chosen? Or did they, like you, simply become so tired of waiting that they decided it was easier to act than to keep hoping for thunderbolts? Perhaps they, too, stared at the inscrutable smile of the goddess and realized that the sign they were waiting for was just their own growing impatience. You are not sure whether this thought is comforting or deeply tragic. The truth, you suspect, is that fate has always belonged to whoever is willing to claim it. The gods may watch and whisper, but it is mortals who decide, sometimes boldly, sometimes accidentally, sometimes with all the wisdom of a confused toad. The temple rituals, the offerings, the prayers, these are tools, ways to delay making decisions until someone is brave or foolish enough to choose. You find yourself wishing, just for a moment, that the gods would relieve you of this burden. A clear voice, a bolt of lightning, a message spelled out in fire or stars. Something you could point to and say, "See, it is not my fault. The gods have spoken." But the temple is as quiet as ever. Even the rat has disappeared, off to new adventures, or perhaps simply bored with your indecision. You realize that you have been taught all your life to wait for permission from the gods, from tradition, from the cautious wisdom of those who waited before you. But the world does not wait. The river rises or dries, the crops grow or wither, the people live or die, all while you are still searching for signs. Perhaps the greatest danger is not in acting too soon, but in waiting too long, hoping for certainty that never comes. You remember an old story, half warning and half joke, about a priest who spent so long waiting for the gods to tell him what to do that his people left without him. They built a new village downstream and started their own rituals, and when the old priest finally received his sign, a bird dropping a fig on his head, there was no one left to tell. You look around the empty temple, feeling the weight of centuries settle on your shoulders. Maybe in the end, the only real sign is the quiet. The gods are silent because they have already given you everything you need: a voice, a mind, a chance to choose. The rest is your responsibility. You rise slowly, your joints creaking in protest, and stand before the altar once more. The marks of vanished sacrifices, the dust of forgotten prayers, the echoes of wisecracking toads and impatient ghosts, all of it is with you, a chorus of reminders that the world does not change for those who wait too long. You bow your head, not in defeat, but in acceptance. The fate of your people is not a burden to carry, but a challenge to meet. If the gods wish to correct your mistakes, they know where to find you. Until then, you will act, and in acting, you will create the signs you have waited for all your life. You breathe in the silence, and for the first time, it feels less like an accusation and more like an invitation. The world beyond the temple is waiting, as it always has, for someone to step forward and decide. There is an old superstition among the temple sweepers. If you complain too loudly in the house of the gods might just complain back. You used to find this amusing, imagining bored immortals gossiping about the daily annoyances of mortal life, the weather, the noise, the persistent failure of humanity to get the rituals right. Now, as you stand before the altar, trying to summon courage for decisions that are not yours to make, you begin to suspect there is some truth to it. The temple feels unsettled, as if the air itself is restless. You remember stories about times when the gods grew irritated, tales told in dark corners by people who had seen too much or too little. In those stories, a sudden thunderclap or an unexpected flood was taken as evidence of divine mood swings. More often, though, the signs were smaller: a lamp that would not stay lit, a door that creaked at the wrong moment, the inexplicable urge to sneeze during solemn silence. Even the rats, it was said, avoided the temple on days when the gods were irritable. Today, the signs of annoyance are everywhere, or so it seems to your increasingly jumpy senses. The lamp beside you sputters, stubbornly refusing to burn with a steady flame. You relight it, whispering apologies for imagined slights, but the flame gutters and finally dies, sending a thin plume of smoke curling up to the ceiling. A chill wind slips through a crack, stirring the dust into eddies that seem to mock your attempts at dignity. Somewhere high above, a bit of loose plaster crumbles and lands with a faint, accusatory thud. You wonder, as you sweep the dust from the altar for the 100th time, whether the gods are genuinely annoyed or simply bored. Is this the moment when their patience finally runs out? Or are they, like everyone else, just tired of waiting for mortals to do something interesting? You look up at the statue of Isis. The enigmatic smile has acquired a new edge, less knowing, more sardonic. You recall the ghost's words: the gods have grown very hard to impress. Maybe that is why the old signs have become so rare, and why your every gesture feels like the setup for a cosmic joke whose punchline you will never hear. The silence grows heavier, thickened by the suspicion that you are being watched by more than stone eyes. You feel the urge to explain yourself, to justify your indecision. "I am doing my best," you say quietly, knowing how feeble it sounds. Your voice echoes, swallowed by the ancient stones. In response, the temple creaks, a long, theatrical groan, as if it is rolling its eyes. A pigeon, somewhere just out of sight, flaps its wings and sends a shower of grit tumbling down from a lintel. You imagine the gods, eavesdropping on your every thought, arguing among themselves about whether you are worth the trouble. One suggests patience, another votes for dramatic intervention. A third proposes letting the mortals sort it out and going back to sleep. You remember, not for the first time, how often the priests of old mistook their own irritation for a message from above. If a ritual went badly, It was proof of divine displeasure. If the bread failed to rise, someone must have angered the gods. But maybe, you think, most divine annoyance is simply a reflection of human impatience, a projection of your own restlessness onto the silence that surrounds you. You try to reassure yourself. You list the things you have done right. You have kept vigil. You have tended the lamps. You have listened, however reluctantly, to the advice of animals and the wisdom of ghosts. You have not run away, not even when it would have been easy. Surely, you tell yourself, that counts for something. But the temple is not in the mood for reassurance. Another gust rattles the doors, and the shadow of a cloud passes over the face of Isis, giving her smile a brief, chilling twist. You cannot help but laugh, soft, nervous, but real. If the gods are annoyed, at least they are paying attention. If nothing else, it is proof that you are not entirely alone. You realize, with a certain grim amusement, that the god's irritation is not the end of the world. In fact, it might even be a kind of blessing. Annoyance is better than indifference. If the gods are paying enough attention to be bothered by you, then you are at least part of the story, even if you are only the comic relief. You bow your head and whisper, "Thank you for your patience, even if it is wearing thin." You listen for a response, but there is only the creak of ancient wood and the sigh of wind through broken stones. You sweep the dust again, slower this time, letting the silence settle around you. If the gods are annoyed, so be it. It means they are listening, and that, for now, is enough. You look out at the growing daylight and feel, not hope exactly, but a new kind of resolve, a stubbornness as old as the temple itself. Annoyed gods, restless stones, and all, you are still here, and you are not leaving until the waiting is done. You have always known that the rituals matter. You have been taught this since childhood, by parents, by elders, by every stone in the temple. Rituals, they said, are the bridge between the mortal and the divine, the proof that humans remember their place in the world. But as you stand in the half light of the temple, brushing dust from your sleeves, you realize that rituals can become habit. Habit can become routine, and routine can become hollow as an empty jar left out in the sun. Still, you perform them. You do so automatically, almost mechanically, as if your body remembers what your mind now questions. You sweep the floor, light the lamps, lay out the offerings of bread and salt, bow before the altar. You recite the same prayers, words whose meaning you could once taste, but which now pass over your tongue like water over worn stone. The motions are precise, practiced, a dance learned so well that you could perform it in your sleep. Some days you suspect you already have. You recall the festivals of your youth, the air thick with incense, flowers strewn on the steps, the whole city dressed in their best, singing the old songs. The high priest would raise his hands, and the crowd would hush as if the gods themselves were listening. Even then, you wondered, was it the ritual that moved people, or the people who gave meaning to the ritual? Did the gods come closer, or did mortals simply feel less alone for a little while? Now, in the silence, the rituals feel both grand and empty. You remember the steps, the words, the sequence of gestures and offerings. Each movement was supposed to have a purpose, each word a hidden power. But the only magic left is repetition, a stubborn refusal to let go of the past, even as the future becomes more uncertain. You find yourself muttering, half in jest, O great Isis, mother of mysteries, if you are truly listening, I have swept the same floor 3 times. If this is not devotion, I do not know what is. The echo of your own voice makes the joke feel both bolder and sadder than you intended. There is a story about a priest who once tried to innovate, to modernize the rituals for a new age. He replaced incense with fragrant herbs from a distant land, recited prayers in the local dialect, even allowed women and children to touch the altar during festivals. The people were scandalized, and the priest became a legend, not for his wisdom, but for the spectacular way in which the river failed to flood that year. Since then, innovation has been suspect, and the safest course is to do what has always been done, in the way it has always been done, no matter how much or how little sense it makes. You wonder if the gods care. You wonder if they ever did, or if, perhaps, they were only ever interested in whether mortals cared enough to try at all. Maybe the power of the ritual lies in the act of doing, not in the result. Maybe it is a way to remind yourself that you are still here, still capable of moving through the world with purpose, even when that purpose is as fleeting as the morning mist. You light another lamp and watch as the flame wavers. You arrange the offerings, perfectly symmetrical, knowing full well the rats will come to claim them long before any god appears. You bow your head, whisper the ancient words, and listen to the silence for a reply. It does not come. Instead, you are left with the hollow beauty of ceremony, a pattern that endures because someone insists on keeping it alive. You realize, with a pang, that this too is a kind of faith, not the faith that miracles will happen, but the faith that meaning can be found even in futility. That persistence itself is a virtue, a way of telling the universe, I am still here and I refuse to disappear quietly. You think of all the generations before you, each performing these same rituals, each waiting for a sign, each leaving their own doubts hidden behind carefully recited prayers. You imagine the goddess watching them all with her inscrutable smile, content to let mortals wrestle with meaning on their own terms. The ritual ends. You snuff the lamps, gather the crumbs for the temple's mice, and sit in the empty echo of your own devotion. For a moment, you feel nothing, no disappointment, no hope, just the weight of having done what was required. It is not glorious, but it is honest. The grandeur of the ritual, the futility of the waiting, the persistence of faith, these are your inheritance, your burden, your blessing. You close your eyes and let the silence settle. If the gods ever answer, you suspect it will not be because of the ritual itself, but because you cared enough to keep doing it long after the meaning was forgotten. And for now, that is enough. There are long stretches in the temple when time itself seems to unravel, when minutes drip into hours, and hours dissolve into a thick, flavorless paste called eternity. During these intervals, When nothing stirs except the dust, you entertain yourself with memories, not just your own, but the stories you inherited from those who waited here before you, each one convinced that the sign they received would change everything. You recall the official stories, the ones that made it into songs and festivals. The high priest, who, after fasting for 40 days, claimed to have seen a serpent coiled around the altar, its eyes shining with divine fire. A sign, the people cried, and from that day forward, serpents were welcomed in the temple, at least until they started biting the acolytes, and the rule was quietly revoked. You remember the tale of the old woman who dreamed that the goddess appeared to her in a shaft of moonlight, whispering secrets about the stars. For years, people came to her for wisdom, and her cryptic pronouncements were repeated until no one could recall what she actually said. When she finally died, the people kept the tradition alive by inventing new secrets every year. No one wanted to admit that the flow of prophecy had dried up. Then there was the infamous Year of Three Signs, a drought, a falling star, and the accidental burning of the granary, all interpreted as omens of impending doom. The priests argued for months about which sign mattered most, and in the end decided to do nothing until the river itself provided an answer. By the time it did, half the village had already packed up and left, taking their faith and their livestock to greener banks. You smile at the memory of the sign of the coughing goat, a minor incident by any measure, but one that has acquired legendary status. During a particularly tense ritual, a goat brought for sacrifice began to cough violently. The priests debated for hours whether this meant a coming plague, a warning to purify the water, or just that goats are unpredictable. In the end, the only change was a new rule: goats must be inspected for coughs before entering the sacred precinct. The goddess, if she noticed, offered no further clarification. Beneath the humor, though, there is a current of sadness running through these stories. Each sign was received with desperate hope, each interpreted through the fog of fear or longing. Some signs were seized upon eagerly, given meaning that suited the needs of the moment. Others were ignored, dismissed as coincidence, because the people could not bear what they might mean. The past is full of signs, most of them ambiguous, many of them useless, all of them recycled endlessly into new tales for a new generation of the faithful and the frightened. You realize, with something like resignation, that you have been raised on these stories, not to prepare you for clarity, but to make you comfortable with confusion. You know now that every sign is followed by debate, every debate by doubt, every doubt by the slow, grinding return to ritual. Perhaps the signs themselves matter less than the endless human effort to make sense of them. You sift through your own memories, searching for signs that felt real. You remember the year the river did not flood and the panicked offerings that followed. Someone found a fish with a mark on its side, a sign, they said, that the river would return, and it did, months later. But you have always wondered whether the fish or the prayers had anything to do with it. You recall a day when a sudden breeze swept through the temple and snuffed all the lamps at once. The priests announced a new era. The next day, Nothing had changed except that everyone felt slightly more important. There is comfort in this, comfort in knowing that you are not the first to struggle with silence, to wait for meaning that refuses to materialize. Your doubts are not unique. They are the inheritance of every priest, every watcher, every hopeful soul who ever set foot in this temple. The stories endure even when the signs themselves fade into irrelevance. You rise and wander to the wall where past priests have carved small marks, one for every sign, real or imagined, that shaped the fate of your people. Some are deep and clear, others nearly erased by centuries of touch. You add your own, a shallow scratch among thousands, and feel the weight of history settle on your shoulders. You are part of the pattern, another voice in the endless conversation between mortals and gods. The day advances, slow and inexorable. You find yourself smiling at the absurdity and beauty of it all, the grandeur, the confusion, the willingness to keep hoping. Maybe that is the true miracle, not that the gods send signs, but that people keep looking for them, generation after generation, against all odds. You bow your head and offer a silent prayer, not for a sign, but for the patience to keep waiting, and for the wisdom to find meaning, however fleeting in the signs that come and go. You are so used to the absence of signs that when something finally happens, it takes you a moment to notice. The morning has become afternoon, and the sun's pale light drifts through the high windows, turning the columns into giant sundials that count nothing but your own growing impatience. You have reached a point beyond boredom, past resignation, where even your doubts seem to be dozing. Then it happens. The oil lamp on the altar, which you have relit 3 times today alone, flares suddenly, casting a bright, momentary halo across the goddess's face. You sit up straighter, heart stuttering, as if you have been caught napping during prayers. The flame bends sharply to the side, wavering in a current of air that seems to come from nowhere. The shadows on the walls twist and leap, and for a breathless second, you imagine you can see a figure standing behind you, tall, robed, familiar and strange and all at once. You freeze. Is this it? Is this the long awaited sign? You have rehearsed this moment so many times, what you would say, what you would do, yet now that it is here, you are as unprepared as a startled goat. The flame dances, elongates, shrinks back to normal. The strange draft fades as quickly as it came. Silence returns, heavier than before, thick with the echo of your own pulse. You stand, searching for meaning, for some detail that will separate the miraculous from the mundane. It could be a sign, of course. It could also be a gust of wind, a crack in the roof, a result of years of neglect. You recall the stories, a drop of rain interpreted as a blessing, a cat's sneeze as a curse, a broken pot as a prophecy of disaster. Every age has its own hunger for omens, and every priest is tempted to dress up the ordinary in sacred clothing. You approach the lamp cautiously, half expecting it to flare again. It burns with the steady stubbornness of all things ordinary. You search for patterns in the soot, read the lines in the melted wax. Is there a message here, or are you inventing one out of desperation? You remember the rat's words. Sometimes a sign is just hunger and shadow, dressed up as destiny. You remember the toad's warning. Do not trust in any sign that arrives on time. You remember the ghost's tired wisdom. Even miracles require interpretation, and the difference between a sign and a coincidence is a matter of who needs to believe. Yet you cannot quite let go of hope. Perhaps this is what faith looks like after it has been scoured of certainty, not the belief that every flicker of flame is a message, but the willingness to keep looking, to keep listening, just in case. You sit again, letting the moment settle. You review everything you have ever learned about omens. Fire means passion, air means change. Sudden drafts mean the presence of the unseen. You imagine yourself returning to your people, announcing, "The goddess has spoken through fire and wind." It sounds impressive, but even as you rehearse the words, you wonder if they are true, or if truth matters less than the comfort of a well told story. A memory surfaces unbidden, a story of a priest who waited for years for a sign and, when it finally came, doubted it so completely that he refused to share it. His people drifted away, convinced the gods had grown silent. Years later, another priest claimed to find meaning in the same event, and it became legend. The sign had not changed, only the willingness to see it had. You rise, determined not to waste the moment. You move through the temple, searching for other signs, a change in the air, a voice in the silence, a pattern in the dust. Nothing else happens. The world is as it was, indifferent and full of possibility. The only thing that has changed is you. You have seen something, a flicker, a draft, a ripple in the fabric of waiting, and you are left to decide what it means. You sit again, feeling the temple's patience close in around you. Was it a miracle or a draft? Is there a difference if you choose to believe? The question lingers, unresolved, like the scent of smoke after the flame has steadied. You realize, with a kind of weary gratitude, that the answer does not matter as much as the willingness to ask. You wait, as always, for the silence to speak. The lamp burns on, and you do not know if it is a sign or merely a draft. But you are here, and for the first time in a long while, you are not just waiting, you are ready. The brief flare of the lamp fades, but the question it ignites within you lingers, persistent as a stone in your sandal. You stare at the altar, at the wavering lamplight, at the columns that have watched generations come and go, each one certain their moment of waiting would be different, more meaningful. You realize how heavy the centuries are, how each hope, each disappointment accumulates in these walls like sediment at the bottom of a forgotten well. A slow despair creeps in. You have waited so long, listened so carefully, searched so thoroughly for a sign that would change everything. And yet, you find yourself haunted by the suspicion that it will not matter. Not the sign, not the waiting, not even you. The future of your people cannot hinge on a single moment of flickering flame or a priest's interpretation of dust and wind. Maybe the gods are silent because there is nothing left to say. You feel the urge to collapse, to let your weight sink into the stone until you disappear entirely. The silence presses in, not peaceful but suffocating, a silence that mocks your questions and your longing for answers. You picture yourself in the stories you have heard and told, those tales where a single word from the gods was enough to rally a people, enough to bring rain or restore the harvest. Now you see them for what they are: comfort for the frightened, explanations for the uncertain, poetry wrapped around the ache of unknowing. You remember the faces of your people, worried, expectant, already half turned toward whatever comes next. They have always trusted that someone, anyone, would hear the gods and know what to do. But what if there is no one to listen? What if the gods are not watching at all? What if the fate of your people depends not on omens, but on the hard, unromantic work of living with doubt? The realization lands like a stone in your chest. You are tired, so tired, of waiting for a sign to save you from the burden of choice. You think of leaving the temple, of slipping away in the night, letting someone else inherit the silence and the dust. But you know the pattern. If not you, then another will sit here, and another after that, each one dreaming of certainty while the world moves on outside. You find yourself laughing, not bitterly but softly, at the absurdity of it all. It is an old, hard won kind of humor, the kind you find in the bottom of an empty bowl, or the repetition of a ritual whose meaning you no longer remember. You are only one in a chain of questioners, doubters, reluctant prophets. The sign is not in the lamp, or the dust, or the draft, but in the act of waiting itself. A strange acceptance settles over you, not the resignation of defeat, but the recognition that some things will never be certain. The gods may be silent, but people are not. Your people are not. They speak, they argue, they mourn, they hope. Their fate is written in the choices they make, the risks they take, the courage they find in one another. A sign is only as powerful as the people willing to follow it. You realize you have been waiting for the wrong thing. You have been waiting for a miracle that would absolve you of responsibility, a voice that would tell you what to do. But the gods do not grant certainty, only the chance to act in uncertainty, to try, to fail, to try again. The world does not change because of signs, but because of those who refuse to stop searching for meaning, even in the silence. You feel lighter, suddenly. The ache in your bones remains, but the fear that paralyzed you begins to melt away. You stand and look around the temple, seeing not disappointment, but possibility. You do not need a sign to justify your choices, nor to reassure your people. You need only honesty, the courage to say, I do not know what the gods want, but I know what we can do together. The moment of despair passes, leaving something stronger in its wake. You feel, for the first time, a kinship not just with those who waited before you, but with those who will come after. They too will struggle with doubt, wrestle with silence, search for signs in the ordinary. If you can endure this, if you can act, even when the gods say nothing, perhaps that is the real lesson, the true inheritance of the temple. You bow your head, not in supplication, but in gratitude for the waiting, for the silence, for the strange, stubborn hope that grows in their shadow. You are ready to leave the temple, to face your people, to speak not as the voice of the gods, but as someone who knows the cost of waiting and the power of choosing. The gods remain silent, but your heart at last is at peace with the not knowing. The moment you accept silence, you find that it changes, not into sound, not into revelation, but into something gentler, like a companion that has finally decided to sit with you rather than loom over you. The air in the temple feels lighter, less oppressive. You can almost convince yourself that the dust is no longer settling, but rising, as if shaken by a slow, invisible breath. You stand before the statue of Isis once more. Her marble face is the same as ever, that small, mysterious smile, lips pressed together in the secret knowledge of one who has seen centuries of waiting, hoping, and disappointment. The stone seems softer in the new light, the shadows more forgiving. For the first time, you look at her not as a judge, but as a fellow witness to the long experiment of faith. You speak to her. You are no longer asking for a sign, but offering a confession. I do not know what you want. I do not know if you are even listening. I only know that we are tired of waiting for certainty and tired of pretending that we understand the world. Your voice echoes, thin and a little embarrassed, in the cavernous hall. The goddess remains silent, as she always has, but now her silence feels different, almost like the pause before a reply. You stare into her marble eyes, empty sockets that once held precious stones, and for a fleeting moment you imagine you can hear a voice, not booming or divine, but gentle and unhurried, shaped from memory and imagination, as much yours as hers. She tells you, not every sign you see is a sign, and not every fate is chosen by gods. It is not a message from the heavens, not the words of a goddess descending from the stars, but the memory of a lesson that has always been there, quietly, waiting for you to be ready to hear it. The power of choice, of doubt, of humility. These are the only gifts mortals are given, and the only ones they truly need. She is not offended by your questions, nor by your failures. The marble smile is an invitation, not a rebuke. You think back to all the advice you have been given, from ghosts and rats and toads, from the stories of coughing goats and disappointed priests. Each one offered wisdom, most of it contradictory, all of it shaped by their own longing for meaning. You understand now that every voice, animal or human, past or present, was saying the same thing in 100 different ways. That waiting for certainty is another way of hiding from responsibility, and that searching for perfect signs is how people postpone imperfect but necessary action. The goddess's smile grows, if only in your imagination, a fraction wider. She seems to say, meaning is not given, it is made, and it is remade each time someone chooses to act rather than wait. You thank her not for answers, but for being the mirror that reflected your own doubts back at you until you recognize them as something shared by everyone who ever waited in this place. You thank her for the silence, for the patience, for the endurance that is sometimes the only kind of faith possible. You lay your hand on the marble, cold and unyielding, but somehow less lonely than before. You promise her, no, you promise yourself, that you will not return to your people as a prophet claiming secret knowledge, but as someone who knows how hard it is to wait and how brave it is to act despite the waiting. You will tell them the truth that the gods are silent and that in their silence they give mortals room to speak, to choose, to try and fail, and try again. You remember all the times you imagined signs and flickering lamps and dancing dust. You smile at the memory. You see now that the temple has always been full of meaning, but none of it was delivered from above. It was made and remade by each person who dared to hope, to doubt, to question, and to believe, however foolishly, however briefly. The light grows stronger, pouring through the high windows, painting the marble goddess in gold. Her smile endures, a small, eternal encouragement. You feel it, finally, the blessing you thought you were waiting for. Not a sign, but a choice. You bow, not in worship, but in gratitude, and whisper a final thank you for patience, for silence, for the freedom to invent meaning, and the courage to live without it when you must. When you turn away, the temple is the same, and yet everything is changed. You leave the temple slowly, each step echoing in the ancient hall like a question answered by silence. The world outside is bright and harsh after so much time among columns and shadows. The sunlight, which once seemed indifferent, now feels like a blessing simply because it is not asking you to decipher it. As you cross the threshold, you turn back one last time. The temple stands behind you, unchanged. The columns reach for the sky as they always have. The statue of Isis gazes on with her enigmatic smile, and the dust, eternal and impartial, begins to settle once more where you stood. You realize that though the temple will endure for centuries yet, your story here is complete. The waiting, the questioning, the hope, and the disappointment all have been woven into these stones, joining the invisible company of every priest, every doubter, every would be prophet before you. Outside, the city stirs to life. The marketplace is filling. The scent of bread and roasted onions floats through the air, and the river glitters, swollen with the promise of another day. Your people see you and turn, expectant. There are questions in their eyes, not the simple questions of children, but the wary, grown up questions of those who have been disappointed before and know it may happen again. You stand before them and you do not pretend. There is no divine fire in your eyes, no secret wisdom hidden in your pockets. Instead, you offer them honesty, which is rarer and perhaps more valuable than prophecy. You tell them that you waited for a sign, that you listened to the silence, that you found no thunderbolt, no booming command from the gods. You tell them what you have learned, that the gods have given humans not certainty, but choice, not answers, but the freedom to seek them. At first, your people are silent. Some look relieved. Waiting is its own burden, after all. Some look uncertain, as if they expected more. But as you speak, something shifts. They see that you are not afraid. You do not promise miracles, but you do promise to walk with them, to share their doubts, to search for meaning together in the everyday world. You see the old woman who once left figs at the altar. You see the farmer who lost his son to the river and still hopes for a sign that he will return. You see the children watching you with wide, curious eyes. You realize that your honesty is not a disappointment, but an invitation, a call for everyone to be part of the story, to share in the responsibility of living, of choosing, of hoping, even when hope is thin. There is work to do. The river will flood, or it will not. The fields will yield, or they will fail. There will be hard years and easy ones, tears and laughter, and through it all, the people will endure, not because they have been given signs, but because they have learned at last to listen to one another and to themselves. As the sun rises higher, you feel lighter than you have in years. The temple is behind you now, a place of memory and possibility, not of answers or certainties. You have joined the long procession of those who waited for a sign and, finding none, became the sign themselves, a living reminder that the gods speak through the choices mortals make, through the risks they take, through the love and the stubbornness that keep them moving forward, even when the path is uncertain. Later, alone by the river, you sit and watch the water flow. The reeds sway in the wind, and a single rat scurries along the bank, pausing to sniff at a crumb. The world is full of small miracles, signs, if you want them, or simply the evidence of life persisting against the odds. You smile, knowing now that you do not need thunder or marble to tell you what matters. Every act of kindness, every shared burden, every laugh in the face of fear, these are the signs that change the fate of people quietly and completely. As dusk approaches, you look back once more toward the distant silhouette of the temple, the columns now golden in the fading light. You whisper a final thanks to Isis, to the silent gods, to all who waited and all who chose. You have learned that fate is not delivered from above, but made new every day by those who are willing to face the unknown and walk forward together into whatever comes next. And with that, you rise and join your people, carrying with you not certainty, but the patient courage of those who have waited in the dark and have chosen, at last, to step into the light.